Hi guys, I don't know whether you can see me, hopefully you can. It's a bit of a strange setup today because I am recording this in my little office in the basement of my house. So I'm not actually in school today, but I thought the feedback I got from the video that I did when I was in school last week was pretty positive, and I think some of you said it was better just to sit and watch and take that in rather than flick through PowerPoint yourself or look through the revision guide or the textbook and learn yourself. Sometimes it's good just to have your teacher, isn't it, to help you on the way and give you the details before you can go away and do anything you want to do. But so options really, either stick your headphones in or put us on the laptop and listen to it and make your mind maps as we go through, or use it as a base to go and research. But all you need to do is watch this really. You don't need to do anything else. This is kind of enough before we get back into school and get back in lessons again. Okay, I'm just going to move back over there so I can slip you back on in with my laptop so you can see the actual lesson that I put together for you. Okay. Right, as you can see, what I would have done today, guys, is I would have set you up with a new yellow sheet, because really what we've been looking at is the first section of the course, which is around medicine really standing still, and Galen and Hippocrates, their theories that lasted so long, and religion obviously having so much control at the time as well, and stopping any kind of dissection or development in medicine. So that kind of period took us right up until the Black Death, through the Middle Ages where we saw the pictures of public health, through the Black Death where we saw these kind of random ideas on causes of disease and how disease was treated, and then started to look at these individuals who tried to start in this second unit, just gone on the Renaissance, who started to challenge the old ideas. So people like Vesalius, Harvey, Hunter, who we looked at, Paré, all in different ways from different countries, challenged Galen as much as they could in different fields. Paré more in surgery, and maybe I guess Harvey and Vesalius in anatomy and physiology and how the body's made up. And then we finished kind of looking just briefly at Edward Jenner, who was the first to create vaccinations with all of his work around smallpox and cowpox. So that's kind of the first bit of a breakthrough, which lends itself into this part of the course really, which is a revolution in medicine. A revolution, guys, means a big change, a big change. So through the next kind of 100 years or so, you're going to see a massive change in medicine, and it's going to be kind of typified by the development of the germ theory. So they're understanding that germs causes disease, because obviously beforehand they had the idea that it was punishment from God or that it was miasma, among others. And then finally, the point around the development of magic bullets and more vaccinations, so people were treated better, alongside things like antiseptics being introduced. So therefore there was less bacterial infection, and also anaesthetics and anaesthesia being introduced. So this unit is kind of all around the 17 and 1800s. Okay, so kind of leaving the Renaissance period behind. If you're looking at your timeline, and we're going from about 1700 to 1900. So this revolution is over a 200-year period, and we know this course, guys, is not about knowing everything. It's a breadth study, it's not a depth study. So we're learning a lot of history, aren't we? But over time. Okay, so it's not about knowing everything. Right. Okay. So I would have started with this because what I wanted to do is, in terms of the key learning question, is just get you to think about how doctors in Britain do actually find out that germs cause disease in the end, and also not just in Britain but in Europe, because Pasteur's French, Louis Pasteur, is one of the key words today, and he's going to be the guy that actually introduces the germ theory that challenges the old idea of miasma. These kind of starter questions here, feel free to pause and have a go at them. I think they're relatively easy. I think every one of you will be able to answer at least 3 of those. I think you'll be able to remember, number 1, the 4 humours. Theory of the opposites, again, I think is relatively straightforward. Middle Ages and religion, you understand that as a factor being important. the public health one around issues with towns. I'm sure you get from that picture in your exercise books when you looked at the problems, Vesalius and Harvey's the last couple of lessons, and Jenna as well as the last couple of lessons, and then finally 8 we've covered many times before. So I think they're quite straightforward questions, but you feel free to pause the video and have a go at those now. Okay, today, how did people best explain disease in the 1750s? Well, like you know, they thought that actually people were believing it was punishment from God. But at this time, and since the Reformation, and since Henry broke away from the church, that was fading. And actually, the idea of this kind of spiritual explanation and supernatural explanation and the four humours that we know so much about was also fading. And this idea about miasma, that people could see rotting food and waste in the streets and knew it smelt really bad and that was the smell of disease, obviously was quite a commonsensical one, knowing what we know now about bacteria and germs. But that's kind of the main reasons. So why had these theories been so popular? Well, really, in answer to that question, it's because not many people were challenging these theories, and not many people were going against these ideas, and there was a reluctance to change amongst society in Europe, and they didn't want to listen to new people. Even with Jenner, like who the hell's Jenner? This doctor from Gloucestershire trying to create a vaccination. Why should we listen to him? So there's a big reluctance, and these ideas have been popular for so long, and they were still popular until the germ theory came along. So a typical picture here, which could come upon an exam when you're looking at sources of an industrial town where you can see there are so many people crowded together on the streets here, and there is also people kind of hanging out of the windows, people cramped in those rooms, and in kind of typical conditions like this in the 17 and 1800s, diseases like TB and diphtheria and cholera would spread really, really easily. This kind of obviously does support the idea that miasma caused disease, because a lot of them think bad air is spreading it. But as it became dirtier, the diseases spread wider. So there's got to be some kind of a link here, and I think this is what Pasteur is tapping into when he starts his thinking. Okay, so before we had miasma, people seeing rotting food and waste in the streets and knew that they smelt terrible. They assumed it must be the bad smell that caused disease. But there was this big theory of spontaneous generation. It's quite a difficult word to get your head around, but I definitely jot it down, spontaneous generation. And it basically, since the microscopes were invented as the new form of technology, okay, and they're really the only form of technology, apart from, you can argue, the printing press, they actually picked up that bacteria on decaying matter was happening, and scientists thought that germs were actually automatically being generated by the decay and then spread the disease. So essentially they're saying that, weirdly, germs are being created by decay and by things going off, which we know it's the other way around now, because we know that germs make things go off and go bad, like milk goes sour, the bacteria in the milk, so on and so forth. So there's quite a lot wrong with this, even though it was a good idea, because they've used microscopes to actually pick up bacteria on decaying matter. But it's actually the other way around. It's the decaying matter creating the bacteria, rather than the bacteria and germs being created by the decaying matter. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to do some information gathering and have a little look at an activity where you see how Pasteur begins to discover the germ theory. I'm just going to talk you through it really quickly now, so you get a chance to have a little look at it. So, discovery of microorganisms. So you do not need to remember this guy's name, Leeuwenhoek. You don't need to remember his name. But he made one of the earliest microscopes, and he discovered microorganisms, or really small germs called animalcules. And microscopes not as good as today, because the resolution was not as strong, the ones that you use in science lessons. The microscopes were nowhere near as advanced. So, improved microscopes, slowly the microscopes got better. And that you can see by 1830, someone called Joseph Lister, who we're going to meet later on in the course, develops a microscope which can magnify about 1,000 times. So that obviously becomes a much stronger microscope. So with better microscopes comes Louis Pasteur's germ theory. So this whole idea of spontaneous generation was challenged. And he came up with a germ theory that actually it was the bacteria and the microorganisms that caused the decay, not the other way around, not the decay causing bacteria. And Pasteur actually showed that you could kill these microorganisms by applying heat, which is why our milk is pasteurized. Okay, so by applying heat you can kill this bacteria, which makes sense, doesn't it? So step 4, Pasteur now had to prove his theory was better than that of spontaneous generation and was correct. So in competition with another French scientist called Pouchet, he did an experiment showing that microbes in the air cause decay. And he did this using conical flasks and so on and so forth. And then he tried to kind of prove it so many times in different situations, and he did. So by 1861, he published his theory called the germ theory. And what that did was he showed that microorganisms, for example, made wine go off and made beer go bad. So bacteria made wine and beer go bad. But could germs actually cause disease? And so he proved that the bacteria was causing disease in silkworms. That was another experiment. And he also improved that bacteria in milk was making milk go off. So proving the link between bacteria and human disease, okay, was something he never got to do. He was never able to do this. He would test on certain animals, like chickens and things as well, which we'll look at in a second, but he never got to this stage. But he started it all off, and he was the one that actually produced and wrote the germ theory. The next step was left to a guy called Robert Koch. And Robert Koch was a German, not a Frenchman, who actually took this a step further, this germ theory, and started to create vaccinations for specific diseases. Okay, so there's a lot there to take in. What I think I will do, because I just mentioned someone called Robert Koch, is just show you this video to give you a little bit of an overview of what he did in a bit more detail, and it's a different way to learn it. So I'm just going to set this up now, so you can actually watch this now. I'll just go on myself.
Next time you do this, you could be doing this. All illnesses, things like the cold
that absurd. And don't worry, it's completely wrong. Yet that's actually what people thought caused diseases for several centuries. They called it miasma theory, and everyone from the public to the medical establishment accepted it. But by the 1840s, in the midst of devastating cholera outbreaks in London, a small group of scientists had grown skeptical. Early microscopes had revealed the existence of tiny microorganisms, and they proposed that it was actually these germs that caused diseases, hence the name germ theory. Though most people held on to their assumptions and strongly resisted this theory, its supporters were determined to prove them wrong by collecting compelling data. Leading the charge was a physician named Dr. John Snow. Dr. Snow observed that cholera-infected patients experienced severe vomiting and diarrhea, symptoms of the gut as opposed to the lungs, and thought that perhaps the disease was transmitted through food or drink, not the air. After investigating previous outbreaks, he became convinced that cholera was spread through contaminated water sources. Then, late in the summer of 1854, when cholera suddenly struck the Soho district, a neighborhood in London very close to his own, Dr. Snow was hot on his trail. He requested the records for the deceased, and within the first week, there had already been 83 deaths. He mapped out where each of the deceased had lived and found that 73 of them resided close to the water pump on Broad Street. Dr. Snow strongly recommended shutting down the pump, and because he knew how unpopular germ theory was, he suggested that cholera was spread through a poison in the water instead of microorganisms when presenting his case to governmental officials. They were unconvinced, but agreed to shut down the pump as an extra precaution. Almost immediately, new cases of infection subsided. Bolstered by his success, Dr. Snow was determined to connect the contaminated pump water to the disease. He found the story of a widow who had died of cholera and lived far away from Soho, but had a servant bring her water from the Broad Street pump daily because she liked the taste. He also discovered a workhouse located around the corner from the Broad Street pump that housed hundreds of people, but only a handful had become infected, which Dr. Snow attributed to the fact that the workhouse had its own private well. Finally, Dr. Snow heard of an infant who may have been one of the earliest victims of the outbreak. He learned that the child's dirty diapers had been thrown into a cesspool right next to the public water pump on Broad Street. Again, Dr. Snow presented his case, but even then, city officials spurned his theory, not wanting to admit that there was human waste in London's water supply, or that they were wrong about miasma theory, which was, after all, hundreds of years old. It wasn't until 1884 that Dr. Snow's efforts were vindicated by Dr. Robert Koch, who isolated the cholera-causing bacterium. Koch developed a technique to grow pure cultures, and through a series of experiments definitively proved that a specific bacterium directly caused disease. Major contributions to germ theory also came from prolific scientist Louis Pasteur, whose study of microorganisms led to the development of the first vaccines. By challenging assumptions with data-driven research, these scientists discredited an age-old theory and sparked a revolution that was incredibly beneficial to public health. But all of this raises the question, what are the widely held scientific beliefs of today that our descendants will find ridiculous? And as any scientist would tell you, a question is an excellent place to start.
Okay, so that's just a little introduction. I know it was a bit confusing because probably what you wanted to see was a little bit more on Pasteur. There's another video which I'll show you in a bit, but let's just go back to the lesson if I can, just so that we can be really clear on where we're up to. Okay, right. So what I would ask you to do now is just go and do a little bit more research yourself into the germ theory. Basically, what you've got to remember is, number one, Pasteur's work was a massive breakthrough in what we call microbiology, the branch of science that deals with microorganisms and germs. So using Jenner's work on vaccinations, he experimented and developed new vaccinations including a vaccine for chicken cholera and one for rabies as well. And then, inspired by Pasteur, someone called Joseph Lister comes along and uses antiseptics to reduce infection, and therefore surgery is much more effective. So there's quite a few people you're learning about and hearing about, but the key ones at the moment are Pasteur and Koch. Okay, so you can't see this, but I would have had a look at these pictures quite closely, and what this is showing is it's the story of Pasteur, and the fact that he is constantly experimenting on different things. So when you do a little bit of research into Pasteur, you'll see that he's constantly trying to prove germ theory in the silk factory with silkworms. He's trying to prove it that milk goes off because of bacteria, that wine goes off because of bacteria. He's trying to have a look at what happens when you heat things up. And like I said before, that's going to kill the bacteria. So all of these are all of his experiments that he does to prove that the germ theory is correct. The key thing that he doesn't do is obviously take that to work on humans, because that's what his competitor Robert Koch does. He works out how this germ theory can link to humans. Factors that are important are, we've got individuals. Again, we've got Koch and Pasteur, so individuals are important. But now we've got things like science and technology, because what Pasteur is using are microscopes, and then what Koch is going to go on to use are dyes. He's going to dye the specific microbe that causes a specific disease, and by isolating that, he can then create a vaccination. And also, new discoveries, okay, things like germs causing disease shows the power of individuals alongside using science and technology properly. There are other factors on the screen there that affect his work. You know, we've mentioned technology and the fact that he had this swan neck flask so he could actually see bacteria causing disease. The government were important as well. The French government did support him. And there were some attitudes at the time that were changing, which is good. Communication rather than trade is probably better to put. So the fact that his ideas could be spread afterwards, and obviously individual genius as well. What I think I might do is just leave you with another video that we just missed, because I think this video will give you a little bit of an overview. You've seen these before, but what this video will do is it will link some of the ideas we've been talking about together just now. And it's from that great series, the BBC series, which is really, really good for revision. And this video talks quite a lot about competition between Pasteur and Koch, which drives these new discoveries.
Germ theory. The delectable idea that disease is caused by microorganisms invading the body. We literally get infested. It's gross, but it's true. Though people didn't always believe it. Even by the start of the 19th century, people had all sorts of crazy ideas about where disease came from. Such as the theory of miasma, which claimed that diseases were caused by foul-smelling air. No, not that kind. And the theory of spontaneous generation, which stated that life basically arose from, nothing. These views started to change when two mighty microbiologists, fueled by national rivalry, entered into a battle to become the first person to prove where disease came from. Enter Pasteur of France and Robert Koch of Germany. It was the Frenchman who landed the first punch. Pasteur was the first to challenge old balmy beliefs, hypothesizing that germs caused disease, and not vice versa. He of milk pasteurizing fame was able to prove that milk went off, and not just because, well, it just did, but because of bacteria in the air. Pasteur went on to argue that this same bacteria could cause disease. To describe these ideas, he coined the phrase germ theory. But someone was hot on Pasteur's heels. Oh yeah, about a decade after Pasteur had first concocted germ theory, Koch took the next step by, making rodents sick. He isolated anthrax bacteria and injected it into healthy mice, who then became ill, proving that the bacteria was the cause. This was Pasteur's germ theory in practice, and quite literally in the bodies of cute little mice. Oh. The rivalry between Pasteur and Koch massively speeded up medical progress. Thanks to the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, the two scientists' respective nations were fighting each other on the battlefield as well as in the lab. So their research was charged with epic significance. National pride was at stake, and nobody wanted to lose the battle of the bacteria. Koch went on to find ways of staining, photographing, and therefore identifying different bacteria, disproving old ideas about all bacteria being the same. This pioneering work, which led to the identification of 21 disease-causing germs by 1900, earned Koch his status as the father of modern bacteriology. Meanwhile, Pasteur was still beavering away, or should we say, chickening away. His germ of an idea about had led him to study cholera in chickens. He found that when he injected an old culture of cholera bacteria into his birds, they fell ill, but did not die as expected. And from that point on, they were resistant to fresh cholera injections. This wasn't in itself a brand new idea, as a century earlier, the father of the vaccination, Edward Jenner, had found that a small dose of cowpox could immunize against smallpox. But what was groundbreaking was that Pasteur was the first person ever to create vaccines in a lab. This was a massive turning point in the fight against infectious disease, as it meant that vaccines could be manufactured, eventually on a mass scale. In Britain, meanwhile, the likes of Tyndall, Roberts and Cheney were frantically translating and lecturing Pasteur and Koch's ideas. And as a result, the ideas of Pasteur and Koch spread rapidly. Soon, a new generation of young Pasteur and Koch disciples came to be known as the micro...
Okay, I'm just going to pause it there because I don't want to go off and look at everyone in one lesson, which was what they were going to do there. Right, guys, I'm going to leave it there for now. But obviously, just this is a slightly different one that we've done today, but hopefully it's helped put things in context a little bit. Drop me a message. I know it's probably better when you actually see me and I'm going through it on the board, but I've tried my best to do it this morning because I just wanted you to have something slightly different rather than just sitting on your own going through a textbook. Okay, so let me know how it went. Good luck and stay safe. Bye.